Hey guys, what is going on? Chris here with Shughead Gaming, bringing you my review for Jupiter and Mars, developed by Tantalus and Wicked Witch, and released April 22nd, 2019 on PS4 and PSVR for an estimated price of $25. Of course, that depends on your region. As usual, this game was reviewed on the PS4 Pro and focuses primarily on the PSVR version. Dive into a neon seascape as a dolphin with enhanced echolocation powers and your AI partner. You and your partner dive into a world transformed by water, solve puzzles, hunt for treasure, meet legendary sea creatures shut down by the remnants of mankind's legacy, and bring the bleached underwater world back to life. Hyped very much since last year's E3 presentation, Jupiter and Mars looks to bring Ecco the Dolphin to VR, but how does that play out? Let's find out. As always guys, if you like this video, please hit that like button, and if you'd like to see more PSVR content from me, please consider subscribing, and for video updates, hit that bell icon. And remember, if you want to see more PSVR news and info, check Shughead Gaming out on Twitter and Facebook. Let's kick this review off with a look at graphics. Going into my playthrough of Jupiter and Mars, I was visually expecting Ecco the Dolphin meets Tron, and while that's exactly what I got, it certainly wasn't everything I expected. There really isn't a nicer way of saying it. Jupiter and Mars just isn't a great looking game in VR. Unfortunately, this game screams of a game that was made first as a flat game and then poorly ported and optimized for VR. The end result is a PSVR port that is often an anti-aliasing nightmare, with jagged textures and horrible pop-in being the norm instead of the exception. Up close, sea creatures can often come off quite beautiful and impressive with their neon accents, but as soon as they leave your front and center view, they dissolve into a mess of jagged colors, losing much of their splendor. In fact, there have been few games in recent memory that could have benefited more from a pro patch than Jupiter and Mars. Fortunately, the overall effect of being underwater and swimming in the vastness of this ocean has survived much of the port, due largely in part to the game's overall art style, which is often stunning. The mix of blues and greens of the ocean water, when blended with the game's above water light sourcing, creates an underwater effect that can often feel mesmerizing. When combined with the rave-like light show put on by every living creature you come across, and the overall feeling of playing, Jupiter and Mars can still at times be equal parts incredible, unique, and mesmerizing in VR, and this despite its all too obvious visual shortcomings. In fact, during my playthrough, I often felt that the developer really should have focused entirely on the VR side of things here, as Jupiter and Mars loses most, if not all, its visual impact when seen outside of VR. Unfortunately, even the impact of VR can't overcome the inherent blandness of underwater games. As a given rule, underwater environments often don't translate well to video games, as the limited draw distance, lack of light, and open vastness simply don't make for a compelling environment. Couple this with the game's bland textures and simple lack of variety, made all the more obvious when above water, and Jupiter and Mars often struggles to make its world interesting. Some neat lighting effects from the use of your echolocation and the previously mentioned neon light show do go a long way, as do the change of level locales, but unfortunately, as a complete package, Jupiter and Mars often still disappoints visually and comes off simply unpolished. Sound is up next.
Mars had returned. Although wounded by the cave-in, he swam to Jupiter's side, where she sang to him a song only dolphins know.
For me personally, I always felt that Jupiter and Mars' success as a game would lay largely in its visuals and audio, and while I often felt disappointed by the visuals in Jupiter and Mars, I feel on the audio side of things it mostly succeeds, due largely in part to its excellent soundtrack. Earlier levels with their brighter and more upbeat aesthetic are supported likewise by upbeat and catchy EDM tracks that wouldn't have sounded out of place on the Tetris Effect soundtrack. Later levels see the game edge into deeper waters and consequently darker story elements. As the feeling of the levels changes, so does that of the music, as the poppy EDM tracks give way to darker, more synthwave variety, bringing to mind strong Blade Runner vibes. Regardless of the flavor, the music in Jupiter and Mars always sits front and center in the sound mix and was a perfect soundtrack to swimming through the depths of these ocean levels with their heavy neon stylings. Underwater sounds, whether they may be those of swimming, dolphin sounds, whale song, or the like, are all present and handled tastefully, but they almost always sit back in the mix, second to the music. There are times when I had wished for more of an underwater feel in the audio mix, but more often than not, I was perfectly content to just swim along and groove. That being said, if you hate this style of music, this likely won't do anything for you. Voice work thankfully is limited to some short cutscenes, for it often felt very much tacked on and often pulled me out of the narrative and immersion of the game rather than pulling me in. All in all, Jupiter and Mars in the sound department succeeds due mostly to its soundtrack-driven sound mix, despite its failures to really bring its aquatic world alive. And that brings us to gameplay. I think many of us who owned a Sega Genesis back in the day hoped that Jupiter and Mars would be the modern realization of Ecco the Dolphin brought to VR. And while it certainly feels strongly inspired by that Sega classic, it often fails to bring much in the way of compelling gameplay to carry its 5 to 6 hour campaign. As a dolphin named Jupiter, you and your partner Mars exist in a world where the polar ice caps have melted, man has gone extinct, and the oceans have reclaimed much of the Earth. While heavy-handed at times and very much a cautionary tale, it thankfully never feels depressing and instead focuses more on the themes of friendship and hope. Your primary task in Jupiter and Mars is to neutralize a global network of bases and machines that are disrupting sea life. Taking out these towers, as is the case with much of the make-work tasks in Jupiter and Mars, consists of you blasting your echolocation ability to highlight a destructible object and then instructing Mars to ram into it to destroy it. Unfortunately, this is really your only ability outside of swimming and is often overused. Outside of avoiding the pulsing machine towers and destroying them, much of Jupiter and Mars devolves into one giant and mostly pointless collectathon, as you'll be given multiple objects to find in a given level. Unfortunately, with no real in-game reward outside of simply completing collections, this often comes off as simple padding to keep you occupied. This is all made the more monotonous when you realize that most of the story required missions are often of the similar find 4 of these things variety. It should also be mentioned that throughout your initial playthrough, many of these areas that you will need to venture into to complete these side collectathons are blocked by the inability to swim deep enough or break open certain walls until you've unlocked a future ability that is story locked. True, this will require you to revisit and scour previously visited levels, and while this certainly adds to the overall game length of Jupiter and Mars, the gameplay here simply isn't fun or compelling enough to make you want to revisit these previous levels. Swimming, while often very cool in VR, grows stale rather quickly due to the safe nature of it all. There is no ability to swim faster, pull loops, leap out of the water, turn sharply, or really anything that would add excitement to the whole swimming mechanic here in Jupiter and Mars. The optional smooth turning and ability to remove blinders was very much appreciated, but the overall experience still feels rather tame and safe for the masses, often holding it back from being something truly fun in VR. Adding insult to injury is the fact that much of my time was spent aimlessly swimming around with tedious backtracking, simply hoping I was headed in the right direction. You are given a direction ring to guide you in the direction of your objective, but it is often completely useless as it points in a direction that is multiple elevation changes and cave walls away, making the whole mechanic rather pointless. Jupiter and Mars is controlled using a DS4 and will most likely be played seated. The game offers multiple control and comfort settings, including blinders, click turning, and a head to tilt option, but motion sickness could still be an issue as up and down movement is locked to head tracking and could still be disorientating for some. And finally, limited space will be required to play this title. And finally, that brings us to fun factor and my final review. Jupiter and Mars for many was a very highly anticipated game on PSVR. Unfortunately, it's simply neither fun enough, varied enough in its gameplay, or visually impressive enough to be truly compelling in any true capacity. It's certainly not a bad game, but its gameplay, visuals, and story just never come together to deliver anything truly special. I rate games on a basis of buy, wait for a sale, or burn it to the ground. At $25, this certainly won't break the bank, and the option to play it flat may be a value add for some, but Jupiter and Mars simply runs out of ideas about an hour in and fails to float on its premise or experience alone. It's unfortunate to say, but this PS4 and PSVR exclusive is probably best left for a sale. Anyways guys, that's it for me. If you like this video, please hit that like button. And if you'd like to see more PSVR content from me, please consider subscribing. And for video updates, hit that bell icon. I'll catch you guys on my next video.